So Fred Tyner has lived in Northwest Washington, D.C. for nearly 50 years. He was born in Milwaukee and had an early interest in astronomy and architecture. He majored in philosophy at Harvard, got a medical degree at Case Western Reserve, and then did a postdoctoral fellowship in neurobiology at the University of Washington. He spent nearly 35 years in the U.S. Army's Combat Medical Research Program, mostly at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research at Fort Detrick. After military medicine, he taught science and math in a D.C. private high school before retiring at the age of 80. He studied art 25 years ago, taking courses at the Corcoran School of Art and Design, and was immediately attracted to both the still life images and to the history and techniques of visual imaging developed in the Renaissance. Though he didn't have time to paint seriously until about 4 years ago, his interest in still life and the Renaissance persists, and he sees them connected tightly to his interests in philosophy and the history of science. If you're interested in purchasing any of Fred's work, he'll be donating all the proceeds to the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund. And then Eric Rottcher is a mixed media collage artist living and working in Silver Spring, Maryland. Raised in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, Rottcher developed his artistic voice outside of the traditional gallery system, shaped by distance, disruption, and a deep engagement with philosophical inquiry. He earned a BA in art from Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania in 2011, where he concentrated on aesthetics, a foundation that continues to inform his practice and is influenced by absurdist and existentialist thought. His visual language blends neo-expressionism, pop surrealism, lowbrow, and Dadaist impulses. His work has been exhibited nationally in both solo and group shows and is held in private collections throughout the U.S. and internationally. His current series, After Party, examines a life of addiction and seduction of excess and the emotional fallout that lingers after the high fades, what it remains when the crowd disappears and the quiet sets in. Hey, before I welcome up Fred, I wanted to also welcome any of our other veteran artists. If you're in the veteran show, would you raise your hand? Any of you? Goodness, I'm shocked. That's Eric there. Well, thank you all for your service. And why don't you welcome Fred Tyner up?
Thank you, Corey. Well, thanks for being here. Last Wednesday, about dinner time, my wife and I landed at Dulles Airport. We had spent 10 days in Florence, Italy, listening to lectures about art history and going to museums, and had a good time. But we saved what for me was the best part until last. We went to a couple of churches to look at some frescoes that were painted almost exactly 600 years ago by a 25-year-old artist named Masaccio, who was regarded as the very first painter of the Renaissance. He died at the age of 28. But in his 5 years, he transformed how we look at the world. And if you've never seen any of his work, I would say run out and do it right now. And as I sat looking at his work, and it wasn't for the first time, and I thought about standing up here today, about all I could think of was, I do need a bit more time. So thanks for being here. As Corey said, I didn't get into art until I was well into my 50s. I grew up in farm country outside Milwaukee. Most of my classmates had to clean their boots off before they could come in the room. But I did take courses at the Corcoran, and I came away with two fairly strong interests. One was in oil painting. The oil painting as we know it today was introduced by the Flemish artists in the early 1400s. They were the ones who first mixed pigment with oil so you could move it around and it didn't dry as quickly as the other kinds of painting like fresco and tempera. But I also became fascinated with a method of painting that many of them used. You may be familiar with the concept of glazing. putting on the top of a painting a very, very thin layer of paint that is actually translucent. It's that thin in order to enhance the colors and to give a greater sense of depth. But there were many of those early Flemish painters who did the entire painting with multiple layers of glazing, often letting each layer dry before putting on the next one. And if you've never seen a piece such as the Arnolfini portrait in the National Gallery in London, dated 1434 or so forth, it's worth taking a look. They're really quite astonishing. It's a tedious and time-consuming way to paint, but I sort of got caught by it, and that's the kind of work I've been doing. And as Corey said, my interest in still life hooks back to my time in the Army, because it seems to me that doing a still life painting is an awful lot like doing an experiment in a laboratory. You set up a fairly isolated environment, and you put stuff in, and you rearrange it, and you take stuff out, and so on and so forth. And at some point, you hope you end up with an arrangement that looks good in the hopes of seeing something new. And sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't work. And when I spend an afternoon trying to set up a still life and decide I've made a mess of it, I often say, yeah, another bad experiment. So what I've been doing for the past 3.5, 4 years is trying to do still life pictures using this very old multi-layer glazing painting method, which takes a while. So usually takes me about 6 weeks to get a painting done, and a lot of that time is just spent washing the paint dry. So this is, we've already got number one up here. I wish my wife were here. She's sick, and I hope she'd come along, because she is sort of responsible for this image. We get our vegetables from a farmer in southern Maryland for much of the year, and one Saturday morning she was unpacking the box and pulled out this big cabbage with all of its outer leaves and put it on the counter and elbowed me in the ribs and said, "You better get this before we decide how we're going to cook it." So anyway, she gets the credit for this image. But it's a fairly reasonable way to see this multi-layered painting. The background here has 6 separate layers of paint in it. And the color, I think you can see the effect is quite different than if I had just mixed the 2 colors on the palette. So there are 3 layers of a dark red, and there are 3 alternating layers of a sort of a medium green. And it gives an effect that I think you can't get in any other way easily. One reason for adding that many layers is that as you put each layer on, it darkens the whole thing. So you could probably get the colors with just a couple of layers, but I wanted it to be a bit darker. I didn't want to go all the way down to black, but that's a fairly good example of the kind of effect you can get. The cabbage itself is 1 green pigment, but just multiple layers. So the shadows have got close to half a dozen layers of the green in it, and the other lighter areas have got fewer layers. This highlighted area right here, which doesn't seem to be coming through, I guess that's reasonable, is a very thin layer of titanium white, which we usually think of as a very opaque pigment. But if it's applied very thinly, it's translucent. And so you can see the green underneath that. Tomatoes, same sort of thing. Several layers of red and several layers of yellow. Tomatoes are certainly red, but you put a tomato next to a fire engine and you can see how orange it is. So there's got to be a lot of yellow in there, and so on. So as I say, this took me about 6 weeks to do, and everything in there is anywhere from 2 to 6 very thin layers of paint. Usually takes several days to dry, although I've recently discovered that these small pieces put in the oven for an hour or 2 at a very low temperature, it works very nicely to dry them. This is a 10 by 10 inch painting on a wood panel. And I brought along, if you're interested, a sample of the kind of wood panel I use. It's a fancy version of masonite, and you can get it with a very nice white acrylic cover, so you can paint right away. You don't have to do any preparation. So I can, if you're interested, you can see a few of my experiments and get a sense of the multi-layer procedure. But as I say, I wish my wife were here to see this. Second one is, this is the first thing I ever composed. I did this about 5 years ago when I was sort of bored over a summer, and I sketched it, and I photographed it, and I fiddled, and I diddled, and I finally painted it. I didn't like the painting. I put it away. I didn't look at it for almost a year. But then I got it out and submitted it to a competition in Northern Virginia and won a nice prize. Since it takes a lot of time to watch these things dry, I like to keep 2 or 3 pieces going at once, and this is the one that I come back to. This is actually the 8th version of this composition that I've done. It's certainly my sentimental favorite, and I imagine I'll keep coming back and doing it over and over again. Each one's a little bit different from the others. This one has a bit more green in it than the previous ones, but it's one that I keep coming back and liking to. This one I did because I realized a few months ago how much time artists in the 14, 15, 16, 1700s spent painting fabric, robes and rugs and everything, and I figured I ought to give it a try. So this is my first attempt at painting something with a piece of fabric, and it was more challenging than I thought it might be. I spent a lot of time standing back 10 feet to see whether the three-dimensional nature was coming out or not, and it did finally, but it took a while. The part that was a little tricky was that these are berries from the Nandina plant, which are only out in the winter, and I was painting in the spring. So the setup that I did was the piece of fabric and the vase, but I had to freehand the berries, and the part that gave me the problem was trying to figure out these shadows. And as I sketched them, I just couldn't quite get it right. So I finally got a couple of pieces of stiff, fine wire and stuck them in the vase and brought them over the front and put some frozen peas on them, which worked out fairly nicely for giving a sense of the shadows, which I think came out not too badly. Anyway, that's a fairly recent one. And then the last one I'm going to show you is the one that doesn't quite fit the title of the exhibit, which is Around Our House, because the last one is a still life, but it isn't from around our house. I'm not very good at drawing, and when I practice, I often scrunch up a piece of paper and put it down and light it and try and draw it well enough that you can see that it's a three-dimensional object. And once in a while I get it right, and a lot of times I don't, but I keep at it. And I decided a while ago that I wanted to do a painting with a piece of crumpled up paper as the center of interest. It sounds a little goofy, but when I try to make a full composition, I had a heck of a time putting other objects in there that made sense. It was a bad experiment. And then the summer before last, my wife and I went back to Milwaukee. It was my 65th high school reunion. And small school, small class, many of my classmates are no longer alive. Some of the conversation had to do with the valedictorian in our class, a very smart young woman who wanted to be a writer and wanted particularly to write stories for the New Yorker magazine. Apparently she was unsuccessful and had a rather unhappy life, died 10 years ago or so. But when I came home, I realized maybe I had the ingredients for another piece. So this is what I came up with, which I called The Great American Novel. And as I say, it isn't characteristic of what you find around our house. I was surprised when I did this at how tough it is to find matchbooks. Even the filling station near our house that has cigarettes behind a locked cabinet doesn't have matchbooks. This one came from Cantler's in Annapolis. If you like to go down and eat crabs, they not only have them, but they're nice, brightly colored. So that's a Cantler's matchbook. Anyway, there are 11 pieces upstairs, and if you're interested, I'll be up there afterwards. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, welcome up Eric Rottcher, everybody.
So, in true Eric fashion, I didn't prepare anything. So I'm kind of winging it. My dad's in the audience. I'm sure he's told me many times I should have prepared something. You're right, Dad. You were right. So I can't talk at any kind of length like he just did, but I'll try. So, I wanted to show some of these works that I did in college because I needed to prove to somebody out there that I know how to draw, I know how to paint, but over the years I've gotten away from that. It's to me, I've figured out the technicality behind it, but it's boring to me. And it doesn't say much. It's just some naked lady. Next. How do you change the next slide? Got it. Told you, not prepared. Once again, naked lady. Naked lady. All right, now we get to something interesting, what I find interesting. So, After Party deals with, well, this side of the party scene, the sober side for the most part. Let's see. Whenever you're in that situation, which I was in a long time ago, it was addiction. My mom had a brain aneurysm. From that point, I was in college, and I was still creative, still wanted to make artwork, but nothing seemed to come out that was positive. And that led into drugs, which led me down a path, which led me to that guy. That's the great deceiver. That's the guy who started the whole thing. He's the guy that gives you the first drug, the first party. He promises you a lot of things, but it's all confusion, really. I use collage a lot because I like to start from somewhere else. I like to build off of other things because it's just easier. I find it's a way to cheat. Creating something from scratch is too hard, as you know, difficult. So I could do all sorts of things with your paintings and just build on top of them, just defile them, I guess, if you want to call it that. Yeah, next. So if I could go back real quick, this slide is a really good example of how many layers my canvases have. That painting was probably 20 different paintings before I settled on that being its final version. I screw up a lot. You know what it's like to be an artist. You screw up a lot. Yeah.
Is that all paint, or is there a collage?
So I'd say it's about 50-50, really. So it's a mixture of spray paint, paper, magazine paper, because I love using old-time magazines. There's also, acrylic, ink, whatever's around the studio, really. Whatever I could find to best say that message. Yeah, so they are errors. There are a lot of mistakes. And they get about that thick. If you really get into the gallery, you could really get up close to them. You see all of the errors. But I love that fact because it reminds me of people. People are nothing but layers. We're all onions. So, and these are like my babies. They're like little people. This one, Temptation. So I started using classical figures because I like to make fun of art and make fun of myself in a Dadaist sort of way. I like artists that take themselves too seriously. I find it to be a little funny, especially if they make something that I don't quite like. So if you don't like what I make, I actually hope you don't like some of it. It makes it more fun for me. I can build off of it. So these birds I started using because I found them to be the kitschiest type of way to say hope. Kitsch meaning in poor taste or poor quality. Kitsch. Yeah, so they're Disney-esque. The hats, I started utilizing hats to show the actual addiction itself. I'm in the midst of a party, and that figure, I usually use figures as a stand-in or a proxy. Somebody else other than my face, that way I can admit things from a distance, essentially. This one is called Matter of Time. So whenever I was in that addiction, so it was just a matter of time until my morals changed, my ethics went away, it all washed away. And the drug just became the most important thing in my life. So this one talks about that in the most happy way possible. She's presenting that for you. She's just letting you know that it's just a matter of time. In the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little piece of a clock. I don't remember where it was from, but it's probably a rage that I had one night, breaking a clock, just not able to get drugs or something of that sort. It all relates back to that, which all relates back to mom having a brain aneurysm. This is, I think it's Misanthrope. I forget the name of my own children some days. I don't know if it's self-explanatory or not, but it's somber. I mean, there's always this little essence of melancholy right underneath. And I try to show it in a more Dadaistic, once again, point of view of presenting the party, the fun, the festivity. But she's not very happy. Like I said, they're proxies. Savior, I think, right? Prophet, that's the name. So whenever, if you stay up for a long period of time, you start to hallucinate quite a bit. You start thinking all sorts of things, but you're not really seeing it for what it is. So those eyes, you don't need them anymore whenever you're that high. You can be the prophet. You can hear things, you can see things that aren't really there, but only you see them. It's just a different world. Another thing about my pieces is this one's really small. It's a 5x7. Some of them in there are 20 by 30 inches. They all have to do with the amount of weight that each thing carries with me, how big the memory is, how small the memory is. So this is just like a small facet of a larger picture. If you go in there, you'd be able to see that I don't use just one size all the time. It doesn't feel right to. In those days, I've met a lot of interesting people. A lot of them, you wonder if they're just sort of feeble-minded. That's the title of this one. The way he's staring at that bird, that little bit of hope, or whatever he calls it. And the party hat's not necessarily attached to him. I think that sort of represents he's kind of on his way out, or he's on his way in to that road of perdition. Yeah. That's all I really can say about that one. Like I said, should have prepared. This one is kind of it's different than a lot of the other ones. So I use birds a lot. Here I use ducks. The old expression, like he's a quack, he's crazy. I met a lot of crazy people. The faces, they just sort of turned into animals. I think that was the route it had to take. Trapped in a room, trying to get his ducks in a row. That's the title, Getting My Ducks in a Row. Hats are fully secured on their heads, so he's in the midst of the party. Smeared lipstick often occurs, as you can see on his face, because when I visited New York for the first time in an art club, I saw this crazy lady on the street. She was homeless. She had smeared lipstick all over her face. She didn't know that. She probably thought she was beautiful. She wasn't. She was terrifying. So you'll see that over and over again on a lot of my works. They all have smeared lipstick. They're all a little bit crazy, because you go crazy in that life. Yeah. This guy. That's when the party's over. I think that's what it's called. So with this, I mean, you have a crystal meth pipe that's attached to the person. That's the drug of choice back in the day. You have a very poorly drawn, fast, hastily drawn bird, another symbol of the hope or messenger. That skeleton of that animal right there, it's kind of a cat-ish type animal. So that just reminds me of going to a party or a place to buy drugs one day. And those morals, those ethics, they do wane, they collapse over time. There was just a dead cat in the middle of the floor that nobody seemed to address. It was a weird lifestyle back then. So that's there. I had to capture that some way. Yeah. Trying to make beauty out of heartache and weirdness. This is the absence of hope. Nietzsche once said that if you stare into the abyss stares back. What I think he meant was if you look into that one thing long enough, it starts to become you, and you become it, and you become one. So whenever your hope is gone, I mean, there's really not much to live for. So that bird is flying with nowhere to go, really. The crosses sort of represent a lot of people that have died over the years. A lot of people that have been incarcerated. Lots of people gone. So that's how I introduce them into my artwork. That's how I give them homage. They were still people even though they were broken. This guy. That is Holding Hope. I think that's the one that really made me get into this whole series to begin with. He's, the bird, once again, hope. All the same symbols. I don't know if I can explain it any better than what I already have. That's it.